Welcome to another conversation in People in Fundraising. This podcast features interviews with nonprofit professionals who discuss their career journeys, lessons learned, and enthusiasm for working in fundraising. And here's your host, the founder of People in Fundraising, Tim Wilson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Season 3 of the People in Fundraising webcast, videocast. And today I am so delighted to welcome Michelle Flores Vryn to our program. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Tim. So glad to be here with you.
Oh, thank you. It's just an honor for me. I feel like, as I mentioned before we started recording, you're a person I really admire on LinkedIn. You're so active in sharing both professional content related to social impact work, your commitment to our industry, but you also balance in a really admirable way a lot of personal content about the stress of working in nonprofit work. You recently posted a photo of you and your dog and other content pieces that I think are so important and genuine to what we do in nonprofits and to let people know who we are as professionals and people.
Yeah, thank you for noticing that. I think I try to blend it as well as I can because it's a real representation of how we live our lives and how we wade through the work. So I'm glad that you're noticing that.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think you have a tagline under your LinkedIn name that's top philanthropy voice as well. So I think that speaks to just how active you are on the platform and sharing good content. Yes.
And that's a recent acquirement as well. So I was happy to see that come in. I was like, oh, wow, it's paying off. So that's good.
Awesome. Well, Michelle, please tell our audience where you're joining us from and your title and such, please.
Yeah. So as Tim mentioned, my name is Michelle Flores Vryn, pronouns she, her, and I am the Chief Development Officer at One Star, which is an organization that's headquartered in Austin, which is where I'm calling in from. But we have a statewide mission focus, and we're one of those nonprofits that we do a lot of different things. And so it's kind of hard to encapsulate in a short elevator pitch, but I like to think of us as a nonprofit capacity builder that really is looking to make sure that people are civically engaged in their community, and we help it with various pathways to that engagement.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. And how long have you been there, please?
So I've been at One Star maybe like a year and 8 or 9, 10 months, somewhere around there.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you for your introduction, Michelle. What I typically do at this point is we pivot back with every guest and have you talk about how you entered the social impact development world, please.
Yeah, so my story actually starts, oddly enough, maybe in academia. When I was in graduate school, I was in a PhD program and really thought I was going to become a PhD. Like, I've always liked to teach and I've always liked research in academia. And my focus area was in environmental anthropology, which if anybody's an anthropology major out there, shout out to anthropology majors. I think we're like a select group. We always like to find each other out there in the world. But my focus in research is really around conservation and how to make global conservation projects successful, and what were the commonalities between successful projects and what made them fail, especially taking into cultural considerations. And I somehow, had a moment, as many of us do in our lives, to where I paused and had to ask myself, is academia the place where the largest conservation movement is happening? And I found the answer was no. That really, at the same time, I kind of was just learning about nonprofits, and I figured out the people really making the largest strides in conservation were nonprofits, like conservation nonprofits. And I was like, who are these people? Wow. and I really, I think too, at the time, you have to think about how much work goes into academia. Do you really want to become a professor? I mean, all of that is great if you really want to do it. And if you kind of like, oh, then you're like, well, maybe I should like take another path. And so I knew my thing was really conservation. And I decided, well, what if I use my skills and talents and communications? At the time I worked at the university in communications while I went to graduate school, which was a lot.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. You gotta do what you gotta do. But I kind of thought, what if I helped fundraise for these conservation nonprofits? That's really what they need, right? Because I think in any field, it's like a lot of times people don't have a lack of good ideas, they have a lack of funding. And so I really thought like that intersection was so interesting. I'm like, what if I could help get more funding to these organizations who are just like great, like they're in the community, they're creating community gardens, they're doing grassroots movements, they're doing water quality, like they're doing all of the real things, they just need more money.
Yeah.
And so I kind of like just said, okay, like I'm going to do this. Like I want to move from working at communications at a university to fundraising at a university. And then once I got my master's, I was like, I don't think I'm going to get my PhD. And I think I'm just going to fundraise for conservation nonprofits. And that's what I did. Here I am.
There you are. And you also have your CFRE designation.
I do. Yeah. Yes. It's always interesting thinking about CFREs because there's so many conversations around like, is it worth it? Do you really get a payoff from doing it? Because it is expensive. I can't remember how much it is, but I mean, it's thousands of dollars. And I'm pretty sure I paid for mine myself because I had maxed out like my budget, my professional development budget, wherever I was at the time.
Oh.
And so there's always like conversations around like, is it worth it? And I think for me, like I did do it and I did take the test because I just wanted to know that I could do it and that like I was, skilled enough and had enough background, like to do it. And I think for me, in a weird way, it was really for myself, just to prove to myself I could do it.
Oh, awesome. That's really meaningful.
One thing I just want to tack on here, Tim, on the CFRE is, a lot of people have questions around like, does it help you get jobs or like, does it increase your pay? And I think, I don't think you ever really know, but I would say if you're getting it just for that reason, I'm not sure I've ever like been paid more because I have it, or that I got an interview that I wouldn't have gotten,
right?
Because I had it. But that's just my 2 cents, because I do find a lot of people come to me with those kinds of questions.
Sure. Yeah. Interesting. Thank you. So Michelle, I first became acquainted with who you are, again, through your LinkedIn advocacy and sharing your thoughts and expertise. And I thought, as I followed you the last few months, I thought, man, Michelle is so passionate about social sector advocacy and what needs to change. How do we change systems and processes and mindsets? My next question for you is, what drives the level of engagement that you have on LinkedIn with your networks of people, and the causes that you talk about in social media?
That is a great question. And I've thought a lot about this because I definitely had like a convergence or like a decision tree in my mind that led me to like, I need to be doing this. Yeah. And I wouldn't say it's like totally organized. It may come out, a little raw, but I think that the cusp of it really was, I enjoyed being on LinkedIn. I've been on LinkedIn for a long time. I think I joined like in 2008 or something. But I never posted. I didn't post for a long time, like maybe 10 years, like I don't know, like a very long time. And I kind of used it how most people did, like you would share jobs, or if you had a job update, you'd share those kind of things, which was what LinkedIn was really originally created for. Like it was really envisioned as like a job search platform, and has evolved into all these other things now, which is really interesting to witness. But I think for me, I realized there wasn't a nonprofit presence on the platform, which I thought was at the time, I'm like, this is so weird because there's a lot of nonprofit workers. When you look at the number of workers by sector, we always say like nonprofits come in third, right behind retail workers and manufacturing. And then here we are, third, nonprofits. So like we're a huge slice of the population, yet I don't see us represented on this platform. And I think when I first was like tinkering with this idea, I thought, well, maybe it's just me and I'm not following the right people. Maybe it's just the algorithm. Like, maybe they're out there and I'm just not finding them. But then the more I searched, I realized like it's not just me. Like, we just don't have like visibility here. And I think the more that I think about that, the more it troubles me. And I do like think about this a lot because for me, it's very much a representation issue. And I think that nonprofits do such important work, and a lot of our work is very, I don't want to say invisible, but it's not visible.
Sure.
And I think that there's a real cost to that. In juxtaposition to this, Tim, like I always think about, like people who work in tech or Silicon Valley and how like we very much like extol what they do, and they're very impressive people. Like they're great entrepreneurs. I mean, I'm impressed by them too. So I'm not like trying to take away their value, but I think so much about like how did they get to have that reputation, and I reverse engineered a lot of it, and I think so much of how we gave them like this platform of not only popularity but also like coolness, kind of like you just like your job, your role is cool, like what you do is important in society. A lot of that was built through like media.
Yes.
Like you see them being interviewed and they're on Oprah and like things are like they're very visible. And so, like sitting here thinking about that, like they're okay, so they have visibility, like they're giving speeches at Yale and Harvard, and like they're just everywhere you look, like tech entrepreneurs, other careers too. And then I think like, okay, well, we don't have that, like professionals. And maybe that's not the answer, but I think it led me to the answer of we need more exposure.
Yeah.
And I think at the same time, like I was realizing there are some people talking about nonprofits on LinkedIn, but so much of it is from a consultant or tech company perspective, because we are their clientele, which, inherently there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think that that's bad, but I think that's all you really see on the platform, or those kinds of things. And so for me, I think like, why do I post so often and the content that I do? I'm trying to create like visibility for our community, because like you and I, Tim, we both know like there's a community of passionate nonprofit people out there. Like we know that. We work with them, we go to happy hour with them, we go to dinner with them. Like we know these people, but like who's representing them?
Yes. Yeah. Great question. And I'm with you. I was pretty dormant on LinkedIn. This is my own term, for about 10 years. I joined around the same time and moved out to Utah. Moved to Utah 5 years ago, and I think that was when I first made a post on LinkedIn. Like, I'm going from higher ed to healthcare philanthropy, and I used it to post job openings. And then I thought, I want to use it for this platform for people in fundraising, and it's been really helpful in that sense. And also seeing people like you and Becky Endicott and John McCoy with We Are for Good. They'll be guests in 2024 as well.
Exciting.
Yeah, it's so encouraging for me to see people like you channeling, again, their ideas, their enthusiasm, their questions, their concerns. So often it's really important. So thank you.
Absolutely.
And you've posted on LinkedIn about your love of discussing the future of philanthropy and artificial intelligence. So how, Michelle, do you stay current with these emerging trends and developing thought leaders in those topics?
Yeah, I mean, important thing to be talking about right now. I don't know that I'm as current as I could be, but I'm probably more current than a lot of people, which is interesting because I forget who did this study. It wasn't somebody in nonprofits, it was a for-profit company, but they tested like who was using ChatGPT like in the first 10 months or something. And so, according to how they did their research, less than like 5% was like for nonprofit stuff, which I was like, oh my gosh, like that is shockingly low, shockingly low. So, so a lot of us aren't using it is the point of that story. And I think like, how do I try to stay up to date with things? I have one great tidbit for your listeners, and it's a channel on YouTube, and the guy's name is Matt Wolfe. His last name is spelled Wolfe. And he is for sure, I would say at this point in time, like one of the leading YouTube channels on like, here's what happened in AI this week.
Oh,
because it is like happening in a week, like by week basis, like things happen every day. And so for me, he is definitely like the go-to person. And it's hard, it's a lot to keep up with. And
yes,
I will say, Tim, like I understand why nonprofit people are not putting this maybe at the very top of their priority list, because it's a lot to learn. We're already so busy. Yeah. But I also feel like if you can find a way to stay on top of it somewhat, that you can increase your productivity at work. Yeah. So this kind of leads into your question of like, what does AI nonprofits look like? And one thing I see a lot is, from a marketing perspective and community building perspective, a lot of the tools will be very helpful for us. So oftentimes in fundraising, we always ask the question about like, how can we make donors feel special or like, support our mission? But I think the broader question we should be asking is, how do we build community around our mission? And some of those community members will be donors or other things like volunteers, social media ambassadors, etc. But to build a community, it's hard. Like, this even like from, your own startup entrepreneurial effort here with people in fundraising, like it takes work. It doesn't just happen, So I feel like the future of like AI and being present online and sharing your brand and sharing your mission is definitely what most excites me. Awesome. Because like we know too already that video content is the highest engaged content on most social media platforms, and even including like LinkedIn. Like people love pictures, people love video. Yeah, but it's hard to do that though. Like it's easier just to try to post without video included. And that's how we do it. But I think with AI, there's so many great tools that can help you do short reels, of course, like add your captions, of course, and things like that. But it makes it just so much easier that I hope we begin to do that more and more.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. And what you talked about enthusiasm for the future, Michelle, are the things that give you pause or that are, a cause of maybe some concern or angst about how you see these trends continuing?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I always feel like nonprofits drop the ball on the marketing piece so much. And this is very much steeped in me having a communications background first, and then I moved to fundraising. Yeah. And so I always feel like fundraising is like a sub discipline of communication, because like fundraising is just like persuasive writing, interpersonal communication, creating like infographics or something that's very high data to something that's very easily digestible. Like all that is comms background, like it's all comms. And I don't think it's bad per se that we don't think of it as a subdiscipline of comms. But I do think fundraising needs to also integrate spreading the brand and understanding like how we are spreading the brand, because we know like people are so much more brand loyal now than they used to be.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, because they want to know like, what do you stand for? And like nonprofits are so well positioned to say, we stand for this, this, and this, because we actually do have values and very community centered work that we do. But I think like we drop the ball in showing people that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I was just at the APRA Rocky Mountains conference. So this was late September of 23. And Josh Burkholz, the CEO of BWF, was the keynote speaker. And he talked about how some nonprofits are now merging annual giving, stewardship, and donor relations into the donor experience management.
Interesting.
Yeah, which I think has a lot to do with branding and messaging and marketing. You know, we should get rid of these sub silos that oftentimes act independently and not always in concert with each other, and have a dedicated donor experience manager that we have that marketing ability, the annual giving and such. So that was a trend that was new to me, but it may be in line with what you're talking about with marketing, and messaging is so paramount for
It's so paramount. I love that as a keynote. That was a good choice for a keynote.
Yeah.
That was great. Like, I love that. And I think like we're seeing this in books too, like The Generosity Crisis, which recently came out.
Yeah.
Of course, by Nathan. I'm blanking on his co-writer right now, the name, but
Brian Crimmins.
thank you. And you know, for their tagline, I suggest you read the book, but if you don't want to read the whole thing, like really the base of the message is that we are in this competition for connection with other brands. And I completely agree. I was like, hallelujah. Thank you for saying that, because we are a brand. Like, we are selling a brand, we're building a brand, we're maintaining a brand. And it's not just all on fundraisers, but we are very much a part of that effort.
Yeah.
And I think it's so interesting, like you use the word silo, like how these things become siloed. But I think the good news is they become siloed because we created it that way. So we can also create it another way, which was
right.
what the donor experience thing was, right? Like, we don't have to have all these different departments that kind of don't understand the integration between them, but they don't understand it because we told them you're all different departments.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, like we could be like a very integrated department that has synergy, you know.
Absolutely.
So, but what is your take, Tim, on the competition for connection that they talk about in The Generosity Crisis?
Yeah, so I did read the book, and I'm a person that really values professionally and personally, you know, relationships, and you know, I'm also an almost 50-year-old Caucasian man, so just my perspective, you know, may be different from others, but I do think, you know, when I think of my kids and what they gravitate to, is very different, and the affinity, the strength of the affinity is very different.
Yes.
Them and their generation, and me and my wife and people we know in our generation that, you know, I give to my dad's alma mater back in Massachusetts because I grew up right with the campus in my backyard, and I just can't imagine that, you know, that's a pretty common donor trend, because we are like, oh, well, this is my alma mater. Or actually, I had Rachel Brandel Mayers from Virginia Commonwealth on in season 2, and her husband is a University of Michigan alum, and she's not. But she said that she has become an individual donor to Michigan because of how Michigan has messaged and stewarded her and the family. So I thought that was interesting.
Michigan is doing something right.
Yeah.
That is interesting. Yeah, that is interesting. So,
Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought up youth because I think I don't have kids personally, so I can't speak to like personal connections to this, but younger people that I know, I think you're so right. And like they do have a different kind of like affinity and almost like a tether to brands than even like when I was younger. I think there was some of that, right? Like the MTV brand or like the Nike brand, like
Yeah.
it's not just like the products and it's how it makes you feel.
Oh, yes.
And I think like, we're just saying that too, like about nonprofits, but I don't know. I really appreciated the couching of it and like you're in a competition for connection. And I think,
Yeah.
competition may sound, I don't know, like an odd word, but I do think that we are really well positioned in this race though. Like I feel like it's good for us to be in this competition because we have such interesting brands. I think we just need to lean into and realize that a little more.
I agree. And as you were talking, I was thinking about just the institutions I'm familiar with, um, whether it's my education or employment, that, for some, it's let's get the alumni back to campus because that's how they connect. They connect with their classmates and professors and um, the grounds they're walking on, and they're walking down memory lane. And other institutions I've worked at, it's been a commuter campus type of feel. And so that's the challenge of we can't bring them back to campus so much because they actually didn't spend a lot of time here outside of classes and clubs. And so that, that in itself is a challenge, but then you add the layer of, well, generationally, there are very radical differences between how the boomer generation and my generation and the rising generation connect to the places where they are at that moment in their life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll just say, Tim, just to kind of throw something in here is I think sometimes maybe we don't even realize like how important some of our missions are to people.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes like that gets diluted or lost in like this louder conversation around like donor stewardship and like you're giving and like it's like yes, but also the human aspect of all of this is really important. The connection aspect of all of this is really important. And I think it's also like less stressful. Like we all know like fundraisers have a huge turnover problem. We've had that problem for a long time. This is not new. But I think that sometimes we come into this work because we want to be a part of those connections and we want to facilitate those connections, but we end up placed in a position to where you're talking about numbers, you're talking about, doing more with less. And it's not why we came here. And I think the more we can get back to why we came here, the happier we'll be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, flipping it a bit from like the donor perspective, telling the story of why the donor gives. And I had a guest in season 1, who I worked with at Intermountain Health here in Utah, and Jimmy Martello, he said that it's so important to convey to prospective donors the stories of why donors are giving. And he had one particular example that the donor family had suffered a really tragic loss and gave to the hospital foundation. And the family felt like they were invited to make a gift. And that was so cathartic for them. And just the importance of that, whether we as the professional are leading with compassion, the donors, responding with compassion of their own, that's that radical connection.
Exactly.
The titles don't matter. At the end of the day, the gift allocation doesn't matter so much as you are welcoming them in to support a cause that can help other people as well.
Yeah. Seth Godin has this really beautiful phrase, one of his many beautiful phrases. And he says, like, we don't have a profit shortage, we have a meaning shortage. And I think he's right. Like people are just like, we're all looking for meaning and in various ways, like in our lives, you know, and we always will be. I mean, I think that's kind of what it means to be human.
Yes.
And I think like we need to also remember as nonprofits that, like, to your point of your story, we're giving them that meaningful opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Speaking of meaning, Michelle, I go back to your LinkedIn posts with this question. It struck a chord with me in a good way that you recently posted that you have meditated almost every day since June of 2008, which you also shared earlier. That's when you joined LinkedIn. So I don't know if there's any commonality
I know,
there.
right? That's so interesting. I don't know if there's a correlation there, maybe that I'm just like totally unaware of, but that's funny.
So if wherever you're comfortable sharing, I'd love to know, first of all, that's admirable. I mean, that's amazing. 15 years. What was the catalyst for this practice, and maybe why at that time in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the question and I'll give an answer best I can. I don't know if I even fully know exactly why then, but I think I was really on, a path of just like asking higher questions and trying to understand purpose. And I think often, like even in college, like we all kind of go through those things. Like, is this really an important degree to me? Or like, am I just doing this because people expect me to do this? And what is it I really want to do? And do I even really want to be a tenured professor? Like, would that even make me happy? So you're kind of like asking and like kicking up the dust of all these questions. And I think like I was looking for like direction. And I will say one thing I know around that time, which I was watching, was on PBS, there's a spiritual thought leader, Dwayne Dyer. He used to do a lot of talks like on PBS. And I think like I was listening to a lot of those on PBS and I was like, who is this guy? Like, this is so interesting. Are you familiar with who Wayne Dyer is?
I'm not. No.
Okay, well, I'll send you a link afterwards. But interestingly enough, like he's now since passed. But he was an academic himself. So he has a PhD in a social science area. But in real life, his PhD advisor was Abraham Maslow. So like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I was like, wow, like that is amazing. PhD advisor was Maslow. Like that's fascinating. But he's very big like in the spiritual thought leadership realm. And I think I was listening to a lot of those PBS talks and all like spiritual leaders will tell you like that meditation is important. I think that even high performers now, when we think of like biohacking, like all of like the stuff you see on social media now, like everyone always says that they meditate, like all these really higher performers. And I think that there's definitely something to that. And so I was like, well, I mean, I guess I'll try it because it's free. Like I have 5 minutes. So like, why would you not try it? And it really had like a profound impact on me. And just like everyone always says, like I wasn't good at it at first. And even today, like I have some days now where I'm like, I'm sitting down to do this ritual, this practice, but like I probably didn't really ever quiet my mind this whole 10 minutes, but A for effort, I guess.
Right.
But I think it just kind of really helped me feel better. And I felt like I had more insight into things that I was deeply questioning. And so I just continued to do it after that. And also I think I made it a goal of mine to say, I'm going to do this religiously because I felt it helped me perform better in all aspects of my life, like my relationship with my family and like at work and with my husband, like everything improved. And so I think when you see something like that happen, you have to ask yourself, like, do you want that to continue? And if the answer is yes, then you need to like commit to doing it.
Yes.
So I think I just said like, I'm committing.
Yeah. That's so admirable. And I think I read and I listen to Arthur Brooks a lot. And he, just like you mentioned with, was it Dwayne?
Wayne.
Wayne. Arthur Brooks, academic, but also he brings his own spirituality into a lot of what he puts out on the content. And I think he became Catholic later in life, and I grew up Catholic. And I think, like that whether it's meditation, spirituality, a practiced religion, that has been beneficial for me. It's always there. The struggle for me is, as you mentioned, is sticking to it, being committed to it. So that's really cool.
I'm thinking you mentioned John and Becky from We Are for Good, and that they'll be on the podcast, which is super exciting. Love John and Becky both, and I've been on their podcast. But when they interviewed the marketer Seth Godin, it was this year, so in 2023, we were all freaking out because he's probably like the most famous person who's ever been on We Are for Good, well, way more famous than me. And he said on the interview at the end of his discussion, like, you don't need more time, you don't need more resources. What you need to do is you just need to decide. And I was like, yes, like that is so true of everything in life. Like I think about that with my LinkedIn post, which I think of as a practice for me. It's like, I do it because I decided I'm gonna do it. And I think so many things in life, like it's like the waffling back and forth, like maybe I'll meditate every day, or maybe I won't, or maybe, but once you decide and you commit, like, I'm doing it because I want my life to be better, and because I want to feel more balanced, and I want to be the best version of myself. Once you decide in your mind, everything becomes more easier.
Yes. Yeah. That's fascinating. There was an article in this week's New York Times, or maybe it was Atlantic. Those are my two go-tos. And the opinion writer said that, they're done with making everything efficient and the work it takes to make things efficient. And I think you just hit on something that you just shared, that no, just make the decision. And then, you can control, you can manage your day, your tasks in a more balanced way. Just deciding, I'm going to do this, I'm not going to do that, as opposed to these, ruthless efficiency
Totally.
tidbits.
Totally. And I think like we can also replace the word efficiency, like for it to be perfect, because I know like my LinkedIn posts, they're never perfect. Like I posted today because it's Friday and I post on Fridays. Not because I thought, oh, this is a great post and I'm finished with it and I think it's all great and the captions look amazing. I thought, like it's pretty good. But I think that we can say the same thing with efficiency. Like it's never good enough, or it's not efficient enough, but like nothing ever is, and I think like this striving for the highest efficiency or striving for perfect is a way to hide. It's a way of like not doing it well. Like a post, it's not perfect, so I'm not going to post it, but if you just decide, like, I'm the person who posts today because today's Friday and I post on Fridays, then you just do it and then you just move on with your life,
Oh, I love that. That's great. Well, Michelle, we have about 10 minutes left and we've only gotten through half the questions. This has been such an enriching and fun conversation. So thank you. I would love to finish off with this last question, because you did at the beginning talk about you had that communications background and thinking about being a tenured faculty member. And then you went into nonprofit work and your reasons for that. So did you have a specific moment or an experience early on where you thought, social sector, fundraising, nonprofit work suits me well? This feels like the air I want to breathe.
That's a beautiful question. I think the answer is yes, kind of, because at the time, I don't think I was connecting all the dots. Like that's like Steve Jobs' most famous quote, right? Is you can't connect the dots going forward. You can only connect them like looking backward. And I think that's true. And I recently did post about this, but I think when 9/11 happened, I was in high school, and it was a really weird experience for everyone, but especially the people like in that high school age, because you don't really know a lot about the world. I mean, let's be honest,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? You really don't, And I think high school kids today know more, but like we didn't even like use the internet every day. Like it was a different time. And so,
Sure.
we really didn't know as much. And I think for people who were in that high school age group, you didn't really know what was happening, and you were very confused. And definitely that never happened before in your life. And it was confusing and also upsetting.
Yeah.
Because you didn't, I think you felt like you didn't have enough information.
Yeah.
And I went to school the next day, or maybe like the following day, because I think a lot of people didn't actually go to school the next day because I think people were scared to go to school.
Oh, definitely.
So when we did go back, like I remember everything was different. Like you walked into the high school and people weren't talking like they normally do. Like the teachers were acting weird, and everyone was just, it was just different. Everything was different. And I remember like gradually, increasingly understanding the gravity of the situation. And I kind of looked around and I realized like everyone's just kind of like in shock, and I was like, well, I guess that's understandable. But after a day or two of that, I was like, I just can't sit here. Like I have to do something, because sitting around doesn't change anything.
Yeah.
Sitting around you're not helping. And I asked my high school teacher, like, can I pass around like a collections jar, like from class to class? And I say in the post, and it's funny because it's true, like this was the time for all of you youngsters listening. I have to like say this. This was the time like when people actually carried checkbooks and cash, so people were like actually giving you like checks and stuff and cash, like when you were passing around the tip jar. No Venmo. I'm sure I would have gotten more if there was Venmo at the time, but there wasn't. And the teacher, like to my surprise, she was like, yeah, like let's do it. And so I was like, okay, so I guess I'll just like walk around with this jar. And she's like, yeah, like do it. Let's just see what happens. And I raised like a couple of $1,000s for the first responders. And it kind of shocked me because I didn't have like any expectation. All I knew was I just couldn't sit there, Tim. Like I just couldn't, and I wanted to help. And I think that was maybe like the beginning of me realizing like your own power. And I hope that like for all nonprofit people, because I think all of us kind of have this sense somewhere like inside of us of like, we're just trying to make things better. And that proactive action is a beautiful thing, and I know like we have like a lot of systemic issues and problems and stress, which I try to make fun of on LinkedIn sometimes. But I think deep down inside, like I just want us to do something that matters. And there's a lot of things that matter. And so I think that moment in my life, I realized like what I do actually can help other people.
Yeah.
And it kind of just, I've been doing that ever since.
Oh, I love that. That's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that. I think because I was into my first year working professionally, and I remember that day. It was just this, among the many other senses, it was a sense that the world suddenly got really small. And for you in high school at the time, as you were talking, I was thinking, the world got small for Michelle as well, and then you took action on that in that statement of think globally, act locally, and you just started right then and there, like what can I do in response, because you said you don't want to just sit around after a couple of days, like how do we process this, what can we do differently, and you did that, which is awesome. Yeah. So cool. Thank you for sharing that story.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. Well, Michelle, the time has gone by quickly, and you've covered a lot of really great topics. And I thank you for the warmth and the humor and the insights you've brought to our conversation today. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, thank you for having me, Tim. I look forward to maybe a part 2. I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, I'd be up for it. Absolutely. Well, for our audience, thank you for supporting the People in Fundraising videocast. As I mentioned at the beginning, Michelle's conversation will kick off season 3 in early 2024. And I'm just really honored to share you and this conversation as the inaugural episode into our 3rd season. And thank you again for your time, Michelle. It's really great to be connected with you.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. It's a great conversation.
And we'll be on touch for a sequel conversation at some point. Take care, Michelle. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you, Tim.
Bye-bye.